Now let's take an example of some of more array methods. So earlier we saw that map, reduce, filter, these things are available on array. Apart from that, we also saw that for each is there. In the beginning, some of the videos we saw that we can add and remove elements in the array using push pop, unshift and shift. Okay, so push and adds element at the last, unshift adds element at the beginning, pop removes element from the last, and unshift removes element from the beginning. Okay, these things we have seen, so we will not go through that again. But now we'll see some more array methods. uh, Keys, values and entries, these are a few methods which are available on the array objects. Actually we already saw these things will be available as static methods on object, right? But here on arrays also these methods are available. But you know that in object, this is available in object as static. So object dot keys, right? It is available as a static method on object. You understand what is the meaning of static method? Static method is that on the on some root object it is available, right? It is not available on the instance. Let's say I am having, let me see. So I am having, let's say, something like const obj is equal to some object is there, whatever, some object, or some empty object, whatever. So we are not doing this on obj, right? We are doing this on capital obj, which is the root object in JavaScript, and then we are passing here obj. Okay, so yeah, that is one way. But in case of arrays, that is not the case. In case of arrays, it is directly available on the instance itself. So for example, arr is equal to 1 2 3, then this thing, or let's take simplicity for some strings in order to avoid confusion with array indices. So let's say a b c d e. Okay, so let's say these are the 5 elements in the array. Now on directly array, this dot keys is available. Understand? It is not that you are doing this statically array dot keys and you are passing arr. It is not like that here, right? It is directly available on arr. Slowly you will remember these things, but yeah, the point is that arr dot keys gives me what? Let's print that arr dot keys. We see that okay, it gives me some sort of what is iterator. It is not printing, so we'll see that later. It is array dot keys does not give us an array. There are some ways to create an array from this iterator, but there is something called iterator on which we can iterate, we can look through, we can loop through the values. Okay, but directly we cannot see that, right? And how to loop through it? Actually we can directly loop through it using for loop only. For off loop. So for off loop we already saw in when we were discussing for off, that it is not only used for arrays, it is used for other array like objects, and we saw that map, strings also we were able to use that. And similarly iterator is something on which also you can use for off. Okay, so let's take an example. So let's say some for off thing where this thing is key. Why key? Because let's name the values properly. This is will contain, this iterator will contain all the keys. Okay, and let's print this. Then we will see that yeah, keys are printed, and this is exactly what is expected, because I'm not taking the values, I'm asking for keys. The key of a is 0, the key of, but you remember one thing, that array.keys returns keys as numbers, not strings. Okay, so you can see that this thing, if you type the type of k, right, then you will see that these are numbers, right? So array.keys gives me all the indices in numbers. Array.values will give me all the values. So if we print the v's, then we will get all the values a b c d e, right? And again, like objects, we also have something called entries here, which will give me a pair. And if you print this pair, then you will get the keys and values both. So keys are 0 1 2 3 4 5 in this array, and values are this thing, right? You understand? So in objects, the keys are keys you specifically provide. In arrays, the keys are automatically the array indices. So this is how it works. And again, here also you could have done directly the structure assignments or something like kv, and this thing will also work. Okay, but most often you can simply use for off to iterate over it, but mainly you will be using this for keys, right? Because if you are trying to go through some key and you want to, so this is available, but most commonly it is these keys, values and entries are used on objects rather than on arrays. But again, it is available, that's why you should be able to know that this happens. So keys, values, entries, all these things are available, and you can use for off to iterate over them, right, as I showed you earlier. Now something iterables, I was mentioning. So iterables is just, I will have a give a brief idea here. I'll give you a brief idea that what are iterables. Iterables, as we mentioned earlier, that they are not arrays, but they are a list, a continuous stream of sort of values, which you can go from one. You can ask what is the first value. You can ask what is the second value. You can ask what is the third value. But it does not give you all the values at once, like arrays, right? And again, how to iterate over iterables, that we discussed, that for off loop. And without for off loop, actually also there is a way, but those things we will discuss later in some advanced sessions, where we'll discuss that how to create your own iterables and how to handle those. But right now it is simple that sometimes when you are dealing with some array methods, you will get iterable rather than array. Then first thing you should know that directly you can do for off, and those will give you values, so you don't need to bother about that, how it will work. And the second thing is that you can, if you're not comfortable directly handling this, then you can simply convert this iterable to an array using something called array.from syntax, which you will see next. So array.from syntax is basically something like this, that it is available as a static method directly on. So it is not an object, it is, you write something like array.from, right? And in that you can provide as argument whatever the thing from which you want to create an array. Okay, so if I write something like, let's say const arr2, or let's say keys, better word will be keys, because we are trying to create key array, list of array of keys, right? Then you can write something like this, that array dot from, and then you can pass your iterable. What it will do, that it will convert this iterable into an actual array. And if you print now, so before printing, let's simply print the keys. Then you'll see that 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the actual keys have come, right? And obviously you can iterate them also. But you see that just in order to iterate, you don't need to convert it to array. It's just that you really want a particular proper array, then only you need to. Just for iterating directly on iterable also you can iterate, right? So that is fine. But now it gives me a proper array of all the keys. Similarly, if I write values, then it will give me proper values in the array. And now this thing is same as the original array, right? So I think it does not make any sense, but sometimes it is used to do something called shallow copy, which we will see later, but generally it is not used. So for example, what if I do something like arr.from arr, array.from.arr, which means that I'm taking the array and I'm creating new array, some arr2 from original array arr. So yeah, so you'll see that, yeah, original array is also abcde, and I'm again getting abcde. So what is the difference? Yeah, difference comes when you have some nested objects rather than primitive data types. You have some nested objects. Then array.from creates something called shallow copy, which we have not discussed right now, but those sort of things can be achieved using some this syntax. And we know another syntax also, like spread operator, and using those things also we can do that, but that we'll see later. Okay, so that is fine. What if I do something like arr dot entries, and I convert that to array? So again, it will give me key value pair. So you can see that this gives me an array of arrays, where each item is again an array, which is basically a pair, an array of two items. and the first one is keys and the second ones are values. Okay, so fair enough, as we have seen earlier also for entries. So same thing. Yeah, so we can convert iterables into arrays, and in fact there are many other things from which arrays can be created, for example maps and sets, which we'll discuss later. So there also array.from can be used. Now there's something called toString. Most of the objects in JavaScript will have toString, but let me show you. So there is something called arr.toString, and this function, if you call, then it will give you a string representation of the object, which means that it can be anything, array or some other thing also. So in this case of array also, you'll see that you'll get a string representation, something like this, right? And it works on other things also. So for example, let's say I will obj is there, and obj is some foo bar, right? Then you will get a string representation of this if you print arr. Okay, that is fine. So let's see that. Not arr, let's say obj. So there are better ways to do it, but I don't know. Yeah, so the default string representations of this thing is object. You understand? So if you take an let's see, do something like this. So let's say I print obj, then you see that foo bar is printed. But let's say I do something like this, that my object is, and you put this value here. You see, you put this value, that you are trying to use this value here. Actually here the object's string representation is we are trying to use that. But if we do that, then you see that my object is object. So actually it is not a actual, it is just like for any object, this object will come. And it will depend on some browsers, or like for Node, these things can be different, but mostly it will be some sort of this bracket, and in that it will show that it will not give you exact object, it will just give you a representation that it is some object. There are other ways to properly create a string from object, which is called stringification. And that you can do something like capital JSON dot stringify. This is an object, this is a function which is available, so you have to use all capital JSON dot stringify, and then that if you pass obj, then this thing will be basically a string representation. So if you, let's say now, if you do something like whatever, xyz is equal to this thing, and if you, instead of obj, if you use xyz, then it will give you a proper representation of this thing, right? Which means that if you're directly printing this xyz, then you are getting a string representation. Let me see, string representation of this thing. Okay, so this thing has its JSON has been created in JavaScript object notation, has been created, and that thing is available as a string. So this whole thing which you are seeing here, this thing is a string. Okay, you can check that here also. If you write type of xyz, if you write something like this, then you will see that this thing is fine, but this whole thing is a string. You can understand it is something like this. You can understand something like this. So in quotes, those whole thing is there, or single quotes, double quotes, whatever you want, but the whole thing is a string. Okay, anyways, yeah, so we'll see that if you do some string representation of arrays, then in the same manner you get just comma separated values. So if you do ABCD, then you will get something like this. You take 0 1 2 3, then it will be something like this, and this thing is again a string, right? That is the exact point, that you are how you're trying to convert an array to some string notation. So that is how. And this thing is a string, and in order to prove that, you can simply do a triple comparison with this thing, and it will be coming out to be true, which means that this thing is exactly equal to this literal, this is string literal, right? And which means that, and again, it's triple equal to equal, which means that definitely this thing is also a string. Okay, so that will be all for this. Next we will see a few more in the next video. We will see a few more array methods.